Hey everybody! Today we will be drawing Godzilla, and we will be doing so using basic shapes. This is something that you guys can follow along with whether or not you're drawing digitally, drawing traditionally, doesn't really matter. We will be going over super basic shapes, getting the outline of Godzilla in, and then ultimately adding the details. And I'll be explaining step by step on how I approach this so you can see it in real time. So as you can see here in my layers, I have a Godzilla layer I can turn on and off, and then I have a blank layer up here that I'm going to name Sketch. And it's good to get in the habit of naming your layers. Now we won't be having a lot of layers in this lesson, but when you're painting and you get better at Photoshop and better at sketching, digital painting in general, you're gonna have more and more layers. It's always good to name them. All right, let's jump right into it. So as you can see here, good old Godzilla is on our left. I went through searching with several different pics, movie stills of Godzilla. I wanted a good angle. I was thinking about doing it front on, mid, back, but I thought this is good, it's showing him roar. So to start this, I would come over here and I would just start doing a bunch of ovals. Now you're gonna keep these soft. I'm not pushing too hard. Once you have that oval in, this is the chest. And then you can see over here that Godzilla he's a thick creature. There's a lot of opportunity to use spheres and cylinders in this. So let's see what happens. So we have the main cylinder here, or I'm sorry, the sphere here. And then the second one, which is the hip and then the abdomen. We're going to put it right there. Now everything's not exact. You can see how rough this is looking, which is why it's so important to add these types of layers on, or to have separate layers so that you can turn them on and off, turn the opacity down, etc. The next thing that I want to do is very, very lightly put in a wireframe as I'm working with basic shapes. So what does that mean? First, I want to get the angle of the leg and how it's bent. So I'm just gonna lightly sketch in this angle. Now I'm eyeballing this side. Okay, so I'm making sure that my pencil stroke is going relatively the same angle. All right, so I'll just point it down here and then the foot is flat on the ground. Okay, and then I see the arms. So when you look at the arms, you see the shoulder, that could be a sphere right here. And then you look at the bicep and the tricep, that's also another sphere, or oval, either one. And then of course the forearm, which is elongated obviously, so you can have almost like a cone-shaped cylinder. You can start it off rounded up here by the elbow and just very, very lightly sketch in where you think that hand is gonna end. Now, I'm not using any rulers whatsoever, so if I go straight across and the hand is happening relatively in the same ballpark area as the actual Godzilla image, that's going to be okay. I'm not here to copy this image directly. I'm here to actually learn how to draw Godzilla. Second is you come up here to the neck. Now I want to get that angle of the neck here. Okay, so it looks like a 45-degree angle. And then the tail, I'm not going to worry about so much. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take this pencil sketch and I'm just going to lightly move it over to the right. So I'm just going to pick that layer and move it. Hold down shift so I don't go up or down. This is so I have enough room for a tail. There we go. Okay, so adding on to this, I'm just going to do another oval right here where the head is. Right, like this. So when you look at this, it's like a mess of shapes. There's not really a lot going on. It's a combination of wireframes and just getting the rough layout and the angles and the proportions of Godzilla. Now the second thing that's going to be important is hand gestures. Hand gestures is important because a lot of emotion and personality comes through with hands. This is why they're so difficult to do. So I'm just going to do a wireframe here. It's just one single line, just like a stick figure, of the angle of the hands hanging off of Godzilla's forearms. And then the next stage that I will do is get that left leg in there. Okay, so I'm just gonna get the angle as best I can. Now it looks like the planting leg is that left one. There's a lot of weight being put on it as Godzilla steps forward and he kind of gives out a really mean roar. Now these shapes will change because the next phase would be after I get the tail in, I'm going to put in a couple more shapes and then turn the opacity down on this layer so then I can start adding details in. The next thing I want to do is just switch my canvas and flip it horizontally like this. You can do so simply by doing a hotkey, which I'm not going to get into the hotkeys now, but you can go into this marquee tool, okay, and then you can right click, free transform, right click again, and flip horizontal. You just have to make sure that you highlight all these layers over here that you want to flip. So it's just pick a layer, hold down shift for the next one, and so on. Okay, so once we have this, I'm going to make sure that I get the angle of the tail. One of the reasons why I picked this pose out of the other photos was because it's such a good dynamic view of the side, and Godzilla is roaring, and it's like an awesome money shot. Now that I see I have some more real estate over here to work with, I'm going to move the sketch over just a little so I have enough room for, you know, the right foot over here and everything. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to very lightly put some thickness in on the neck. One of the problems, well, I should say one of the challenges that happens when you sketch something like this is that beginner drawers spend a little too much time starting with the outline, and they should be working with the basic shape first. An outline is more finalized, and when you start details, you know, getting in all the teeth and making sure everything is darkened and the tongue is out, it makes you settle for those lines that you did, because then you end up erasing, and you don't want to do that. Okay, you want to get the basic shapes in, you want to get the angles in, which is why I like playing with the wireframe. The angle of the mouth is very, very important because Godzilla has such a specific snout on this thing. I love the concept art for it. They did a phenomenal job with this creature. All right, so if you notice, it's very, very subtle. Like I'm putting in some of the indication of the outline, but it's very scratchy. Okay, it will change. I want to make sure I get the angle. It's kind of like I'm using a protractor. I'm just lightly sketching in the angle here. Okay, the mouth is open. I'm rounding off the inside of the mouth. I'm going to square off that jaw, that very powerful jaw. Okay, and that's it. I don't want to add anything else to it. The next thing to do is to start figuring out how to build these legs out. Now, the knee joint is really important to have, and I'm going to keep that as an oval right down here, because you can see the knee, how the very front of it is actually pointing down like this. It's not pointing straight ahead. This one is pointing straight ahead. That's another angle that you want to make sure you get right, because it's going to show weight distribution. And weight distribution is something that I like to talk about a lot just in figure drawing in general, but you know, for me, my specialty in genre is creature design. And weight distribution still comes into play no matter how many legs your creatures have or what it looks like. So I'm going to start adding in the thickness of the legs here. Okay, and there's a lot of roundness going on. So this is why that oval shape, that sphere to take care of the abdomen is so important. And then you have that secondary one up here to take care of the chest and where the stomach starts. Okay, so now I'm going to do another oval to show the thickness of the calf muscle. Okay, so like I said, Godzilla is very thick. And then I'm going to work on tapering the body until it works. Okay, so I'm going to get this angle down here where the ankle is. This is easily a forgettable area. You could just take it all the way down to the foot, but it won't look right. You have to make sure that you show those joints in there. I'm going to darken that up a little bit because that's such a pronounced shape. Okay, so now after I get that, I want to make sure that all the angles of the fat folds are also correct. So, I mean, I guess he's fat, or he's just built like a linebacker that's 800 feet tall. But you can get the angle of that inner thigh right here, because if you notice over here on Godzilla, that angle points directly towards the chest. So I'm just going to eyeball that as best as I can to go towards the center of the chest. And this is why it's good to have these types of layers, because this is like my measurement layer. This is what I would draw perspective line layers on. All right, and then you can eventually turn it down and then draw over it. Okay, so now we have the angle of the knee coming down. Let's work on the thickness of the foot without worrying about the toenails. Let's just get the sharpness of where I think the toenails would end up. So we get that. And then the next thing we get is the other foot. Now, if you draw a straight line across here, we notice that that line, if we were to go to the bottom of the foot all the way over, it would reach the top of that toenail. So you can get it in like a ballpark estimate, but I would draw the construction line, right, like that. So now I notice that my measurement's off, or the length of the left leg. So I'm just gonna increase the length down here, and this is when I get kind of picky. But it's good to be picky because it enables a more realistic look when you start adding detail. You want to make sure all your measurements are correct before the details come. Okay, now if I do a line straight across, that's going to be about the part where that long toenail comes out, which is this one right here. Okay, the next step is to get that left arm a little bit more situated. The chest, there's a lot of lines going on here, so I'm going to erase some of them just to help me out. And I'm just going to decrease the amount of lines I'm going to use. So the chest comes out there, and then up here is the sphere for the left shoulder, and then you got your bicep, which isn't showing much, and then you have the cylinder shape. Now the cylinder shape, the angle is different on this than it is this. So you want to get that in here. So the downward angle of its right arm is here. I'll put the little end of the cylinder here, mixed with the ball joint. You want to pretend like it's an écrochet, or you have some kind of clay figure or a manufactured figurine that you can take apart like a toy. Okay, and then you slowly start to build it up. All right, I'm gonna get the shape of that hand there, and then just wireframe those cool looking fingers. Okay, you want to get the gesture. Same thing with his right arm. So it looks like that pointer finger comes down, claw. Pointer comes down right there, and then the pinky kind of separates over there, and then the thumb stays hidden. Okay, so after this, I'm not even worrying about the back spikes, except I'm going to draw one single line that's going to outline the length or the height of where those spikes need to go out in space. They're pretty thick on the back, and then they taper in really quickly right there. That's the only line I'm going to draw for the spikes right now. And then in the back here in the tail, there's not a lot of real estate to work with here. It's just a thick tail. As long as you leave this opening right here, you're good. So I'm just going to draw a little ellipse, okay, to show where I want the opening of that tail to go, and then I'll just draw the tail around that. And the spikes can happen when I start adding the other layers in here. And then the other thing is make sure you lightly sketch in the roundness of the thigh, and the knee is going out this way. Once I have that, and if you're drawing along with me, try not to use your eraser at all during this stage, okay? This stage is meant to mess up. You want to be gritty, you want to be dirty with this stage so that you can hone the shape and polish it later on. Okay, so if you have like a bunch of lines going everywhere, don't feel bad. That's awesome. That means your brain is working correctly and you're putting all of your thoughts down on paper. Now I'm going to do some measurements that I would be picky about later if I were to do a finalized sketch. Notice here how if I were to do a slightly angled line on his left knee, that is where the end of the toenail would go on that foot. So this is going to ensure that you're not making a foot that's too long. So I'm going to try to duplicate that angle by a light line. So now I know to extend the foot right about there. So now I know how far out it goes. And then you come back. Same thing to be like a cool little visual measurement that you can do. There's a line at the back of the heel, right like this, okay? Now if I were to go straight up, if you can see my cursor, if I were to go straight up, it's going to hit where that sphere and that sphere are going to meet for the abdomen and the chest. So let's see where that happens over here on my sketch. Oh, sorry about that if that looks crazy on your screen. Here's where they meet, ballpark estimate. I want to do a line straight down. So now I know that's roughly where the back heel is going to be. And now the calf muscle comes out just slightly, because you can see it over here. It just comes out slightly, and it's just a very rough indication. And then you have, you know, like I guess Godzilla's genitals or whatever's down there for a big radioactive lizard. It's down there. Okay, and then this is an angle that you don't want to miss either. On that kneecap, it comes in where the shin is, and then it comes out where the foot is. That's a very important characteristic to show that there is bone and muscular structure underneath all of that skin and scales. Okay, so let's turn this another way. Okay, let's flip it. Flip it again and make sure everything looks okay. Yeah, that looks decent. Now I'm going to add one dot for the eyeball. Right there. And we'll play with it later. Now here's the fun part, everybody. This sketch layer is on its own layer. Or these lines are on its own layer. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to turn the opacity down to about 20%. So I'm just going to click it and hold it and drag it all the way down to about, actually, you know what? I might keep it at 40. Let's keep it at 40. I'm going to add a new layer and I'm going to call it Godzilla. Actually, Godzilla Sketch. Okay. I'm going to call my original sketch layer Scribble. Or you can call it Underlay, whichever one you want. And then I'm going to start a better outline here. So I'm going to go up to the Godzilla sketch. Now the brush I'm using in Photoshop, if you have the newer ones that is, it comes standard. And I've mentioned this before in my other videos. If you right click with your pencil, you're going to see dry media brushes, and you're going to see Kyle, the Ultimate Pencil Hard. I like using that because it's a really nice sketch brush. All right, now here's the fun part. Based on my measurements and what I think is right, we're going to start a nicer outline. Now, I've been drawing creatures for many, many years, so I'm pretty used to measuring these things just visually. But if you don't have a lot of experience with doing this and you feel kind of intimidated, you need a ruler or whatever, please know that it's okay if you make little adjustments along the way. I'm just measuring everything at certain angles based on what I think is happening. And the fun thing about drawing Godzilla is there's already dozens of different versions throughout the decades of Godzilla and what he looks like. I think they really did a great job with this latest design that's been hitting the theaters, just because of the intimidation of the snout. I think it just looks awesome. And then also the tapered look. Like, it's such a really cool look where the head is smaller and then the neck gets really thick and the legs just look super strong. Okay, so I kind of messed up. I notice, and this is why I like to keep everything light, I'm going to erase that bottom jaw and that eye. So the eyeball is definitely not right. I'm going to go back to the scribble layer and I'm just going to erase that eyeball. What I messed up on was how far that mouth opens and the angle. It almost opens straight across. Okay, and then you have that layer of teeth, and then you have the very pronounced jaw. There we go. That looks better, because then you have your tongue. Now, the fun part about this, like I just got through saying about there's different versions of Godzilla, is that if you want to change the design a little bit, let's say you want to do your own cool little take on Godzilla, and You know, there could be other cool radioactivity going on, maybe bigger spikes. There's really cool exoskeleton shapes on it. Hey, go for it. Now I'm just going to indicate where the eyeball is. It's closer up here to the top of the eyebrows, and it's still not reaching the top of the eyebrows. I'm going to darken that just to make it a little bit more sinister. Because in reality, once I get these basic shapes in, these hard edges, I can go back when I'm adding detail and just color that whole area in black and then just put a white dot there, and that'll look really menacing, almost demonic. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to start looking at all the muscles. I don't care about the scales yet. I don't care about shading. I don't care about skin wrinkles. We're not going to get all of those in today. What we can get in are the most important aspects of this creature, and that is the proportions and the angles of which these things happen. So I'm going to try to put in this tricep and bicep based on the angle of my sphere, but also what's happening over here on the photo. So I'm trying to eyeball everything, making sure that everything is happening at the correct angle. Now notice how I'm still sketchy with the lines. Okay, not a lot is happening as far as, oh, I better finalize all the skin and everything. No, that's not what's happening. I'm going to turn down the scribble layer just a little bit. Right about there. Go back to the Godzilla sketch. I'm going to switch my canvas again, like this. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of round off the top of that shoulder, and then I'm going to put in that back part where it looks like he has a hunchback, and then it kind of tapers right down into the back. Now there's a lot of spikes and scales and everything happens here, but I'm going to represent that with this straight line. And then I notice over here, right underneath the forearm, is where I guess you could call it love handles slash obliques. It's happening right there. So I'm just going to indicate that with one straight line and just kind of round it off into there. And then the hip is, it looks like I was pretty correct about where that sphere was going to go for that hip. So I'm just going to come down like this, making sure everything is measured correctly. I'll come down right there, and then the big calf muscle. That's why I wanted to make sure that that angle was correct on the calf muscle. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And then the next thing that I want to do is just making sure that those hands are correct. So I'm going to go to the left hand, like so, and just add in the thickness based on the original wireframe that I did. Now with Godzilla only having 4 fingers, it's going to make things a little easier, so you don't have to draw 5. Like this. Okay, so I caught myself with a little mistake, so I'm just going to angle that. I guess you can call it his middle finger, and I'm going to angle it. And it looks like it's tapered this way, so there's like a little fat stubby part right there. And then his pointer finger comes down, and then there's the claw. And I'm going to change all this is when I put in more details later. Okay, because you can tell I'm already kind of picky about it. And then I'll just indicate where the thumb is. Boom. And that's all I want to do with that part. Next, what I want to do is I want to make sure this chest and abdomen are correct, because that's a very important part about Godzilla. The chest does not come out a lot. It actually comes straight down, and then it rolls outwards just slightly before it comes in. And then the abdomen pops back out like this. And then its genitals, and then it rolls right underneath, right by that knee. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be the exact position, but close to it. And I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. So if you look at this right here, where the kneecap meets the underbelly of Godzilla right there, you can see the thigh going straight up, that line going through those fingers. It's doing the same thing for me. So now I know that things are measured pretty well. It doesn't have to be perfect, but so far it's working. Okay, and then the next thing, now I'm going to actually put in the claws. I'm going to indicate them. These are very important because when you sketch a creature with sharp claws, you'll notice that weight distribution can cause the toes to bend certain ways, and you want to give the illusion that there's a lot of weight behind this creature. Okay, this thing weighs as much as a skyscraper. I mean, Godzilla's huge. And this toe right here, you can tell that the toenail is pointed inwards a little bit, almost like it's pigeon-toed with the other one. Okay, so this one's straight, this one's pointed in, and then the pinky toe is pointed in even further. It's kind of like the human toe, where our pinky toe, when we look at our foot, and the pinky toe is curved almost. That's just how we are. That's how we stand, and that's what the weight looks like. And then we'll put in the big toe over there. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. That looks pretty good. And then I'll just very, very lightly indicate where the skin is starting to fold around the kneecap. Maybe put in some lines of where those scales are growing on it. But for the most part, I'm just going to leave it bare for now. Okay, the next part, I'm just going to continue to trace what I drew with the other leg. There's not a lot of, it looks like, bony landmarks for Godzilla, which means that he's just thick, man. It's just like a linebacker. Here's another really cool measuring technique, again, using the vertical lines here. The kneecap on his right leg, if you go straight down, that's where the pinky toenail is. So I'm just going to use that same method over here. I'm just going to go, there's the kneecap, go straight down, and then, oh, okay, so it looks like it's cutting the pinky toenail in half just a little bit. So I'm just going to finish sketching the flesh around it, put in some fat folds right here where I can see where the ankle is, and then it looks like you can only see one more toe, and I want to honor that angle that I had originally drawn in my scribble layer of how far out the toenail goes. So you can start to see that the work I was doing to measure Godzilla is paying off in a big way. The stance isn't too wide, the feet aren't too long, the hands aren't too large or small, the head is... I can actually probably get smaller with the head now that I'm looking at it. So that's what I'll do. All I have to do in that case is I'll just take the head here, right click, and I'm just going to shrink it, right like this. Move it back over. I'm going to try to keep the same height. I have that marker with Photoshop, but even then you don't have to do that. Okay, so once I have that, looks like I can move up just a little bit right there. And then I'm going to move forward. So why am I moving forward? I'll tell you why. Because straight line measurements again. And I'm going to use a different color this time so you can see it. Look at his jaw. See the back of the jaw? If I were to do a line straight down, it looks like it's coming on the outside of that abdomen. Now I got to follow that same measurement over here. So there's the back of the jaw, and I'm going to skinny it up a little bit. So here's the back of the jaw, right like that. If I were to do a line straight down, it looks like the abdomen is coming out too far. So I'm just going to adjust the abdomen and making sure that it goes right there. And then the chest comes out here. So those are my self-measuring techniques when I'm trying to do something freehand, okay? The best way to sketch and learn how to do it in observation, so like those of you that are in foundation studies and you're doing a still life on a table with the lights down and you got reflections and everything, this is a really good way to measure without any rulers whatsoever. Not happy with the back here, so it looks like I'm going to have to lower it. It looks a little too high right there. And then I'm going to angle the back this way. Okay, that's looking better. So then his right shoulder, it doesn't come out nearly as far as I had originally drawn it with my scribble layer, but that's okay. That's why we do this. And then I'll make sure I honor that same angle like that. Okay, now it looks like there's not a lot of space in between these fingertips and his right thigh. So let's draw that right thigh in. Right about there. And then it looks like his wrist is a little thicker. So let's do that. Okay, and then I'm just gonna put in some indication of the thumb. Looks like a big claw right there. This finger comes out, pretty big pointer finger. Its middle finger is curved inwards like this, and then it looks like its pinky is almost touching the thigh. It's pretty close, but not quite. Like I said, you don't have to get these exact. Ballpark estimate. Okay, it looks like that finger's a little too long. I just caught that, so let's... Yeah, that's better. Okay. And then the next thing I want to do is just add thickness to the tail. Again, this is actually a pretty simple part because there's not a lot to it. It's just a very, very massive thick tail. And then I'm going to put in the spikes in a little bit. So it looks like the tail's long. It gets skinnier over there. There we go. Okay. Now it's starting to look like Godzilla. At this point, I'm starting to be pretty happy with maybe adding some details to this. And I'll show you how I would start that. And then what I'll do is I'll speed up the video so that you can see me put more details on it in a short amount of time. But here's how I would start it. Originally, I would start with the eyeball. Okay, so make sure you get that eye socket in there. There's a lot of personality that happens in the eye, so you want to start with that area. Making sure that some shading exists inside, so I'm just going to kind of lightly indicate where that might be. Like that. It's pretty cool. Light indications of where the scale lines would go, maybe on the side of the head here. Yeah, very, very intimidating creature. Looks like there's a little point where the snout is up here. Definitely don't want to, you don't want to screw up the original design for Godzilla because he's so cool looking. Okay, the spikes on his back. Now, we could get technical here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you have 9, 10. Some of them overlap because, you know, the back of Godzilla has multiple rows of spikes. We all know that. At this point, why don't we try to get the large ones first? All right, like this. Start off with this one, and instead of copying from this design directly, so every tiny little detail or whatever, I'm just going to estimate what I think is happening. Okay, now again, have fun with this part. Okay, put your own little twist on it. Remember, this is just learning how to draw Godzilla as a whole. You don't have to draw Godzilla exactly the way he looks in a movie, okay? Because that's not what this is about. Eventually, when you start practicing with this, you can start making up your own versions of Godzilla. And if you want to do this to King Kong, you want to do this to, you know, like the Xenomorph or whatever movie creature that you feel is awesome to draw, like Predator, you can start sketching from movie stills and then do it on your own, like draw from memory. Because when you draw enough of these, then that's when you start to really learn. Okay. Actually, I'm probably gonna move out some of these. Maybe this one. Make it a little bit more intimidating for Godzilla. There we go. That looks a little better. Now I'm making this up. I'm just putting on my own little flair on it. Maybe I should just draw like a demonic Godzilla one day. I just had that idea. And then just start putting in these really cool tail spikes here, and they're going every which way. And again, like, you don't have to just sit here and do every single one, but you do want to make sure that you hit these angles correctly to make it look like that the tail is twisting towards the end. You definitely want to give that illusion. Like this. Okay, so that's looking kind of cool. I'm going to erase a little bit of that eye right there because Godzilla actually does have some pretty pronounced cheeks with a very, very small window, or eye socket window, I should say. Those lines are very, very prominent. And I think that's what makes this Godzilla design so cool. They just did a phenomenal job with it. So there's some more rows of spikes. Another thing that I can do is kind of make the edge of Godzilla up here a little bumpy so that the ridges of scales, well, I'm giving the illusion that the scales are everywhere. They're not just on the back or anything. Yeah, so that'll be kind of cool. All right, so now sit back and just watch a sped up version of me drawing details, and then we'll slow it back down again. I'll explain what I did, and then if you're doing this from home, that's awesome. Or maybe this will give you some newfound confidence in drawing Godzilla. So please enjoy the sped up version. Okay, so while you were watching the sped up version, you saw me start to add in some detail. Now I could sit here and spend another 3, 4, 5 hours putting all of the shading and all of the detail in, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is we saw how we built up Godzilla first by using the basic shape layer, and then from this we gave the creature an outline and we made sure all the measurements and the proportions were correct. The second thing we did is we turned down the opacity, and then we ended up with a decent sketch to really start to learn about the anatomy of Godzilla and ultimately put in more and more detail. Now, when you look at this sketch based on the movie still, yeah, there are some adjustments I can do right off the bat. I mean, I could see that maybe the back of the neck right here is a little too thick, so I can come in. And there's a lot of little micro adjustments. And if you have the time, please, by all means, spend an extra hour or two on it, because then you're going to train yourself how to take basic shapes, start at that level, get all the measurements correct, and then when you start adding detail on it, the image that comes out of that is going to be so much better off, and you won't end up putting details on something that's not correct. So thanks again for watching this, guys. I hope you followed along and you learned something. And until next time, see you later.